In terms of Todorov's theory, our narrative is as follows. The equilibrium is the three boys, Luke, Matthew and James, waking up and getting ready for the day at college. These three boys are the three antagonists in the film, all being friends, however are different in more ways than one. The disruption is the occurrence of the girl, who happens to be the protagonist in the film. James sees the girl first in class. The audience then see unravel the consequential crush upon her, which then creates the jealousy between two of the antagonists, James and Luke. The new equilibrium is when two of the antagonists who are trying to impress the girl, James and Luke, decide that they have embarrassed themselves enough in their efforts to impress Scarlett, the protagonist, and give up their pursuit of winning her over. This differs from other films such as There's Something About Mary, when the two guys trying to win over the girl, no matter how much effort they put in, do not give up. We had many binary oppositions following a modernist structure, which are used to create meaning for the audience, such as imagination versus realism, loneliness versus relationship, and boy versus girl. This was done as we believe most of our target audience will be able to relate to these binary oppositions and have at least gone through one of these at some point in their lives. Our narrative structure is chronological in order to show development from the character's perspective. It begins with the three boys getting ready for college and then their struggle to win over the girl. The film is in chronological order as each scene takes place in order of it happening. The narrative structure is quite simple as our genre conventions, it being a rom-com, tend to keep the audience spoon-fed rather than hiding the things from them. This allows the audience to understand the order of actions and how the characters interact with one another, which sets up a classic rom-com climax. Our narrative is omniscient, as we are able to see everything as it unfolds, and nothing is hidden from the audience. They are all seeing and all knowing about everything taking place. The audience are able to realize that they are seeing everything from each character's view. For instance, when James was trying to chat up Scarlett, the audience are able to see what is going on at the same time for Luke and Scarlett, along with James. Much like other films such as There's Something About Mary, we see that we are surprised that there are so many guys trying to win over Scarlett, just as we saw that many guys tried winning over Mary. However, in our film, the underdog, Matthew, wins the girl, whereas in There's Something About Mary, it's the favourite and the one who has loved her since childhood, Ted, who eventually wins Mary's heart. Our film is considered as a hybrid as it is a merge of two main genre categories being romance and comedy. We chose to have some amount of intertextuality within our film production which relate to other media products such as film posters which have largely featured throughout the film on walls within the college. Our film, the elements within the storyline is very typical of the rom-com genre. The swishing hair scene, where the editing pace has slowed down, and the mise-en-scène through lighting and costume is quite romance-based. We can see other examples of the swishy hair and similar lighting on other media products such as many popular shampoo brands like L'Oreal. The basic backbone of the storyline is pretty much typical of the rom-com genre as it is just a standard boy sees girl he likes situation. The structure of the rom-com genre is also followed as we decided to have a closed ending, letting the audience know how everything worked out. We see other examples of the boy sees girl he likes situation in other films such as The Notebook. Dialogue, body language and facial expressions are fairly typical of our genre. The hot, mysterious protagonist is quite general of the romance genre, as it allows the audience to step into their shoes and see things from their point of view. This can be seen as a way of escapism. However, we've done a little bit of a twist on this to make it more relatable to teenagers in that we made her quite the uninterested in relationship type character whenever one of the boys tried to move on her. One of the antagonists, James, is quite generic as his posture is quite bent over, letting the audience know he may be unconfident. In addition, with regards to voice and dialogue, it's very slow and he stutters many times. He keeps looking around the room and touching his face, which further adds to his nervousness around Scarlett. This can also be seen in the classroom, when it cuts towards the antagonist and we see him looking around, giving almost death glares toward the protagonist. The clothing, hair and makeup can also be seen as generic, as for instance, the protagonist seems to be really dressed up in comparison to most of the antagonists. The protagonist's clothing consists of stuff such as a white top, which has connotations of an angelic presence and innocence, whereas the antagonists seem to be wearing hoodies. The hair could also be intertextual with that of Japanese anime, as it is eccentric and it is usual of the main character to have hair that stands out. The narrative function of the characters is quite typical of a rom-com genre, as the antagonists are always fueled by their lust towards the protagonist. However, the protagonist is just there to thwart their plans. Cinematography was used in various ways to create various meaning, as our film, between scenes, can switch genre and the meanings it wants to get across to the audience. In one of the scenes, we see the main character sitting in a classroom, and we use many high angles and shot reverse shots to show off her beauty. We also attempted to make it serene by utilizing tracking shots. In one of the gym scenes, one tracking shot in particular conveys a message to the audience. It is when it tracks from the heaviest weight to the lightest and straight back to the heaviest weight. By doing so, it transfers from not wanting to impress the girl to full on trying to impress her. It also kind of portrays the desperation that the antagonist has of wanting to win over the girl over his friend. In other scenes, such as the scene where the lads are back after the weekend and trying to win over the girl, we wanted to create a sense of urgency and tension. To do so, we used shots from different angles along with the boys running in the scene in order to convey speed and action. The cinematography is quite generic, as in most romance movies, the romance scenes are quite slow paced and we didn't have to utilize many shots in order to slow the pace of the film down. Sound wise, I'd say our film is very typical of the genre. A lot of the soundtrack is from websites providing copyright free music in order to not incur any copyright issues. The background music, which was non-diegetic, was, for example, played over the montage to intensify the scenes. In other scenes, such as the swishy hair scene, we used parallel and non-diegetic sound in order to attach the attention of the audience on the moving screen, along with the sounds they'll be hearing. Many examples of diegetic sound were used in the film, as well to add the realistic feel to the film. Examples include the blow dryer drying Luke's hair, the dryer in the toilet drying Luke's trousers, and the water running when Luke presses the tap. In terms of editing, we used slow-mos in order to put the girl on a pedestal, as her being this godlike creation. This was to show that the boy really does like the girl, and there is chemistry there, as we are seeing the slow-mos as if we are in his head whilst he daydreams with his eyes wide open and mouth dropped. Cross-cutting is there to increase the intensity of the moment, as well as increasing the pace of the editing. For instance, during the montage, when it jump cuts, as we see what each boy is doing for a few seconds, this lets the audience know that they are all within the same time period in their world, but they are each doing different things. Onto the pace of the editing. It varies from the beginning of the film till the end of the film. For instance, the beginning is quite fast, as we are trying to create that intense feeling of the boys going to college. However, once it gets to the classroom scene, it really slows to create that feeling of nervousness and tension. This slow-paced type of editing is incredibly generic in romance films, whereas the faster-paced type editing is incredibly generic in comedy films. The references to other rom-com films like There's Something About Mary and The 40-Year-Old Virgin. The mise-en-scène throughout the film is quite generic. For instance, where it is set. The setting of the average rom-com takes place in schools or educational institutions and are normally based around teenagers. This is similar to that of There's Something About Mary, as Ted first gets to know Mary through them both attending the same educational institution. Clothing, like previously said, is there to encapsulate the difference between the protagonist and the antagonists. That makes them seem evil or good through the colour scheme and the connotation through these. The main character's facial expression is quite blank throughout. This is because we want the people watching the film to be able to put themselves in her shoes, and this is quite generic of the romance genre, as this fantasy type of role that most men watching will want to fulfill. The body language of the protagonist to begin with is quite flirty to show that normal outgoing innocence of the teenage girl, and further into it becomes more profound to give an idea of the type of personality she has. We decided to have a closed ending where the audience are able to see the third antagonist, Matthew, at a table. The camera is focused upon him as he is in conversation with someone. The audience slowly see the camera pan towards the person he is in conversation with, which is the girl Scarlett. The audience can then suggest that it was the person who didn't bother at all in his effort to win over the girl that actually got her in the end. We did this as we wanted to convey the idea that the underdog could overcome the favourites and that anyone can win over their crush.